As Ukrainians commemorate the first anniversary of the anti-government protests on Kiev's Independence Square, also known as Euromaidan, the political wrangling between the West and Moscow is escalating. US Vice President Joe Biden has met senior Ukrainian leaders in Kiev amid warnings from Russia against American arms supplies to the government. Saad Ahmed with more.
As Kiev marks the first anniversary of the Maidan protests, US Vice President Joe Biden is visiting Kiev to offer support for Ukraine's armed forces fighting pro-Russian separatists in the country's east. He's meeting both Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk as well as President Poroshenko. But this support has raised eyebrows back in Moscow. Russia is warning the US against supplying lethal aid to Ukrainian forces fighting pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine.
We have heard repeated confirmations from the US administration that only non-lethal weapons are delivered to Ukraine. If there is a change of such policy, then we can speak of a serious destabilizing factor that can seriously impact the balance of forces in this region.
The development follows the US confirming its commitment to assess how best to support Ukraine, while saying nothing is off the table, including lethal aid. And as the deadly exchange of fire raged between troops and pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine, in Kiev, Ukrainians laid flowers to slain protesters near Independence Square 1 year after the revolt that toppled former leader Viktor Yanukovych began. President Petro Poroshenko also laid a wreath to commemorate those who died in the protests.
We highly need to be united now. There is an enemy in our yard and I took a decision. Today I will sign a decree awarding heroes of the 100 as heroes of Ukraine.
Back in the backdrop of the first anniversary of the Maidan protests, residents in the east of the country are still counting their dead as battles continue to flare despite a so-called ceasefire.
For more now on the matter, Mr. William Spring, a political analyst, is joining us over the phone from London. Mr. Spring, Russia's been very clear. They're warning the US against applying this lethal defensive aid to Ukraine. The US have said that that option is still on the table. Do you expect Mr. Biden to announce any lethal aid at this stage?
Well, Biden can announce anything really because he seems to be totally unfazed by international law. Issues such as, for example, in Afghanistan, he's superintended the drone program. So there is no question that Biden will do what his master tells him, Obama. And if Obama decides that the only way to solve the problems of Ukraine is to have a massive bloodbath in the heart of Europe, destroying all the economy of Ukraine in the process, what's left of it, then that will be done by his obedient servant, Joe Biden. I don't think the American administration thinks very clearly at all about the consequences of their destabilization of Europe, which is what they're involved in. They're involved in a deliberate attempt, it appears to me, the American establishment to destroy the European economy. Because if you destroy Middle Europe, then there's not much left. Already the German growth rate has slowed down to 0.01% or something like that, something ridiculous, over 3 months. And Germany was the great engine of economic growth. So now we're in a position that it's just simply, the Americans seem to be wrecking the whole European continent, and the EU apparatchiks, such as Barroso, are saying nothing. They seem quite happy to see the European Union wrecked, the commercial heartland of Europe wrecked. And there is going to be no gain for Europe in all this.
But some would actually argue here that the Russians are also providing lethal aid to the separatists in the east, and so they shouldn't really be protesting against any moves made by the US.
No, I think the history of it is entirely different. The Ukraine was an independent state with a constitution, and there were to be elections next year under that constitution. Now, the Americans, in association with their far-right allies in Ukraine, decided then to intervene and instigated a coup. However, it was supported by a certain proportion of the population, but not by any means all the population. The silent majority of the East were ignored. And you see, America is very good at inculcating democratic values until they don't agree with them. And their whole object has been to destabilize Russia. It's a geopolitical object. Their object is to destabilize Russia and threaten Russia on its own border.
Yeah.
Of course.
And a recent report yesterday released by the UN did say that since the ceasefire was actually implemented in September, there's been around 1,000 deaths in the east of Ukraine. If the US do decide to provide this lethal aid to the Ukrainian government, what implications would that have at this stage?
Oh, well, the Americans would like to make the east of Ukraine like Syria. It is America who is responsible for the entire destruction almost of Syria, or some of it. And they would like East Ukraine to be in the same sort of mess. They would like their only idea, the Americans' only idea of civilization is ruined villages, ruined cities, bombed out cantonments. We saw it all in Vietnam. We've seen it all before. There is nothing that can stop the American military machine. The people in the Pentagon and the people in the State Department are all mostly now ex-military. People like Christian Hoff, they're ex-military. They think in military terms. They give Obama military advice. And their advice is let the empire expand into now up to the very borders of Russia.
Yes.
The Americans are a threat.
Okay, Mr. William Spring, a political analyst joining us over the phone from London. Thank you very much for your time, sir.